The quiet beginning, the night was quiet in Los Angeles. City lights blinked like scattered stars, and the air carried a strange calm that only came after a long day of noise and fame. Keanu Reeves sat by the window of his small apartment, holding a simple envelope in his hand. It had no fancy design, no official seal, just his handwriting, soft and deliberate. Inside that envelope was something he had kept for years. Something that tied him to a person who had once changed the rhythm of his life without even realizing it. Sandra Bullock. Their bond had always been quiet. Not loud, not romantic in the way tabloids love to imagine. It was built on small acts. Shared laughter, moments of silence on film sets, and the kind of understanding that didn't need many words. Keanu always believed that real connections were not about how much noise people made, but how deeply they listened when everything else went silent. That night, as the city continued to hum, Keanu was writing a letter. Not an ordinary one. It was a letter of gratitude, but he didn't plan to send it to Sandra directly. He wanted it to find her through an act of kindness that would mean more than any award, interview, or public gesture ever could. He looked at an old photograph on his desk. It was from the early days of filming Speed. Sandra's smile in that picture was unguarded, pure. It reminded him of the days when both of them were new to fame, when the world was simpler and dreams were fragile. He had once told her that fame felt like walking through fog. You could see lights ahead, but never the ground beneath your feet. She had laughed and said, "Then I'll hold the flashlight." Years later, she still did. Only this time she didn't know it. Earlier that week, Keanu had attended a small charity event under a different name. No cameras, no red carpets, just a dimly lit community center that helped young artists and struggling families. It was one of Sandra's favorite causes. She had been quietly funding their art scholarship program for years. Keanu had discovered that by accident when a volunteer mentioned a woman with kind eyes who always mailed anonymous donations. He instantly knew who it was. So instead of sending her flowers or a thank you card, Keanu decided to build something lasting, something that reflected her spirit. He called it the Light Project, a small scholarship fund designed to help young women in film school, artists who couldn't afford tuition, single mothers who dreamed of writing their own stories. Every recipient would get a handwritten letter that said, "Someone believes in your light." No one would know that Keanu started it, and no one would know that it was made in Sandra Bullock's honor. But that night, as he sealed the envelope, a sudden knock echoed at his door. It was past midnight. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened it, his old friend and manager, Paul, stood there, breathless. "You're trending again," Paul said, holding up his phone. "Somebody posted that clip from the gala, your speech about kindness. It's all over social media." Keanu smiled faintly. "That's fine. Fine. You didn't even mention your project or your work. People think you're hiding something." Keanu shrugged. "Not everything good needs to be explained." Paul sighed, frustrated but used to his calm. "You're impossible, man. The world wants big gestures, not silent ones." Keanu turned to the envelope in his hand and whispered, "Sometimes the silent ones change the world more." The next morning, in another part of the city, Sandra Bullock sat in her garden, sipping tea while her rescue dog rested by her feet. Her phone buzzed, an email from the same community center she supported. She opened it and read, "A new anonymous donor has started a scholarship program in your honor. We wanted to thank you because your kindness inspired someone else's." She frowned softly, touched but confused. She hadn't told anyone about her donations. How could someone know? The email ended with a small quote. "Someone believes in your light." Her eyes welled with quiet tears. She didn't know it yet, but that one sentence would connect her and Keanu again in ways neither of them could have imagined. She whispered to herself, "Whoever you are, thank you." And far across the city, Keanu looked out the window again, unaware that his act of silence had already reached her heart. But fate wasn't done. What started as a quiet tribute was about to unfold into something much bigger, something that would reveal secrets, heal old wounds, and test the very meaning of humility and friendship. The Light Project was only the beginning. The ripple of kindness, the morning after the letter reached Sandra's heart, Los Angeles woke up like any other day. But for her, something felt different. She couldn't shake the feeling that the email wasn't random. The words, "Someone believes in your light," kept echoing in her mind like a song she couldn't stop humming. She had seen those words before, years ago, scribbled on a small sticky note that Keanu once left on her trailer door during the filming of Speed. That day had been rough. She was exhausted, nervous, doubting herself. She remembered crying quietly in her car, thinking she wasn't good enough. When she came back to the set, that note was there, no name, just a short line in neat handwriting. At the time, she didn't know it was from Keanu. She found out months later during an interview, when he smiled shyly and said, "You needed to know you were light, even when the world made you feel small." That same sentence now stared back at her from the email. And deep inside, Sandra knew who was behind this new act. She didn't need proof. Her heart already knew. Meanwhile, Keanu went on with his day quietly, visiting the community center in disguise again. He wore a cap and plain clothes, blending in like a volunteer. The children there had no idea who he was. They just called him Mr. John, thinking he was some kind man who helped fix their old computers and painted walls. As he helped a small girl paint her first mural, she looked up at him and asked, "Why are you doing this if you don't even live here?" Keanu smiled. "Because when someone helps you see light, you should help others see it too." She nodded, not fully understanding, but smiling anyway. Sometimes children grasp truth without needing to explain it. Later that week, the Light Project grew faster than Keanu expected. Journalists began hearing whispers of a secret fund linked to Sandra Bullock's name. Social media filled with stories of struggling artists suddenly receiving help from an unknown source. People started using the hashtag #BelieveInYourLight without knowing who started it. Paul, his manager, grew anxious. "Keanu, we can't hide this forever. The press is already connecting dots. They think you're behind it. Are you sure you don't want to just confirm it?" Keanu shook his head. "It's not about me. It's about her, and about what kindness creates when you don't need credit." "But people might twist it," Paul warned. "They'll think it's some secret romance or a stunt." Keanu's eyes softened. "Let them think whatever they want. Truth doesn't need defending. It just needs time." Paul sighed, knowing once Keanu decided something, he wouldn't change his mind. Meanwhile, Sandra couldn't stay still. She called the director of the community center, a kind woman named Marie, asking if she could visit. Marie agreed but didn't reveal much, saying only that the donor wished to stay anonymous. Still, Sandra went. When she arrived, the children ran around her, excited to see the woman who had supported them for years. One of them handed her a crumpled thank you card covered in paint stains. On it, someone had drawn a man and woman holding a candle together. Underneath, a sentence was written in shaky handwriting. "Thank you for sharing your light." Her eyes misted. "Who wrote this?" she asked softly. A little boy pointed to a man fixing a broken projector near the stage. "Him, Mr. John," Sandra turned. The man wore a cap and had his back turned, sleeves rolled up, carefully rewiring cables. There was something about his stillness, his quiet focus. It reminded her of someone she knew too well. She stepped closer, heart pounding. "Mr. John?" The man looked up slowly. Their eyes met. It took only 1 second for recognition to fill the space between them. Keanu froze, caught in his own silence. Sandra whispered, "I knew it was you." He smiled faintly, lowering his head. "I didn't want you to find out like this. You think I wouldn't?" She said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You're the only person who writes like that." The same words, the same handwriting. "Keanu, why didn't you just tell me?" He looked at the children laughing nearby and said quietly, "Because kindness doesn't need witnesses. It only needs meaning." Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "You did this for me?" "No," he said softly. "I did this because of you. You've been helping people silently for years. I just wanted to return that silence with the same respect." They stood there, surrounded by the sound of laughter and paintbrushes, both realizing that their bond had never faded. It had only evolved. But before they could say more, Marie approached with urgent news. "We have a problem," she said. "The press found out. They're outside. Cameras, reporters, everything." Keanu looked at Sandra. "It's okay. We'll handle it." Sandra shook her head. "No, Keanu. Not this time. The world deserves to see what quiet kindness looks like. If they find out, let them. Maybe they'll learn something from it." Keanu hesitated. "Are you sure?" She smiled softly. "Yes, but only if you stand beside me when they ask." He looked down, thinking. This wasn't part of the plan. His gesture was meant to stay hidden forever. But now, fate had pulled him into the light he tried to avoid. He finally whispered, "All right then, together." And as they walked toward the door, facing the flashing lights waiting outside, neither of them knew that what would happen next would test not only their friendship, but the world's understanding of what true kindness really meant. The quiet tribute was about to become a storm. When silence met the world, the sound outside the community center grew louder with every passing second. Reporters shouted questions, camera flashes burst like lightning, and curious onlookers pressed against the windows. Inside, Keanu and Sandra stood near the door, the calm in their eyes hiding the storm waiting beyond it. Sandra turned to him and said softly, "You've hidden in the background long enough, Keanu. Maybe it's time people saw what kindness really looks like. Without red carpets, without headlines, just truth." He gave a faint smile. "Truth is quiet, Sandra. The world doesn't always listen to quiet things." "Then let's make them listen," she replied, gripping his hand for just a second, grounding him. He nodded slowly. "All right, but we'll do it our way." When they stepped outside, the noise exploded. Reporters shouted questions all at once. "Keanu, is it true you're the secret donor? Sandra, did you start this charity together? Is this about a hidden relationship between you two?" Sandra raised her hand gently and the crowd hushed a little. She spoke with calm strength. "This isn't about rumors or relationships. It's about kindness, the kind that doesn't ask for cameras or credit, the kind that grows quietly when someone believes in another person's light." Keanu stood beside her, his face calm but thoughtful. "The Light Project isn't mine," he said simply. "It belongs to everyone who chooses compassion when no one's watching. I just tried to honor someone who's been doing that for years." "Are you saying this was for Sandra Bullock?" a reporter pressed. Keanu looked at Sandra and smiled faintly. "It was because of Sandra Bullock," he said. "She's helped more people quietly than anyone I know. I just wanted to follow her example." For a brief moment, silence filled the crowd. The honesty in his words cut through the noise. Even the reporters lowered their cameras slightly, realizing they weren't hearing a publicity stunt. They were witnessing something pure. Later that night, the clip of their appearance went viral. It spread across every social platform, not as gossip, but as inspiration. The world wasn't talking about scandal or romance anymore. They were talking about humility, kindness, and how two of Hollywood's most private stars reminded people that compassion still existed. "Believe in Your Light" trended for days. People began leaving small notes in public places that said, "Someone believes in your light." Strangers helped each other. Students raised funds for classmates, and entire communities formed kindness chains inspired by the project. Sandra sat on her couch that night, scrolling through messages from fans and strangers. She smiled when she read one that said, "I was about to quit art school, but then I read your story. Now I'll keep going." She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "That's what it was for." But she didn't know that in another part of the city, Keanu sat in darkness, troubled. The sudden attention had brought unexpected problems. Some investors questioned the project's funding, demanding proof that it wasn't a publicity move. Anonymous critics online began twisting their story. One headline read, "Keanu Reeves uses Sandra Bullock's name to promote secret project. Paul called him immediately. Keanu, you need to respond. This could damage both of your reputations." Keanu rubbed his forehead tiredly. "I don't care about reputation. I care about keeping this clean. We can't let negativity take over something pure." "Then let's fight back with truth," Paul said. "We'll hold a press conference. Clear the air." Keanu stayed silent for a long time. Finally, he said quietly, "No, I'll do something better." The next morning, without telling anyone, Keanu went back to the community center early. He sat with the children and helped them prepare for their art showcase. The walls were covered in colorful paintings, dreams turned into color. One painting caught his eye. It showed a man and a woman standing under a streetlight holding hands, surrounded by stars. At the bottom, a little girl had written, "Sometimes heroes don't wear costumes. They wear kindness." He smiled at that. Maybe the world could argue about intentions, but children never misunderstood kindness. They just felt it. Meanwhile, Sandra decided to visit him that afternoon. When she entered, she saw him sitting quietly with the children, teaching them how to make small paper lanterns. The sight brought tears to her eyes. She walked closer and said softly, "You never stop, do you?" He looked up and smiled. "The world doesn't get kinder by talking. It gets kinder by doing." She sat beside him, folding paper carefully. "You know, you could have told the press the truth. They would have backed off." He nodded. "Truth is like light. It doesn't need to shout. It just waits to be seen." "And what if they don't see it?" she asked. He looked at her gently. "Then we keep shining anyway." Her eyes softened. "Keanu, what if I told you I want to join you fully? Not just as inspiration, but as a partner in this. What if we take the Light Project global?" He stared at her, surprised. "You'd do that? After all this noise?" She smiled. "Especially after this noise. Because the louder the world gets, the more it needs quiet acts of good." For the first time in a long while, Keanu's eyes glistened. "Then let's build something bigger than both of us." That night, they began planning in secret. New branches of the Light Project, education funds, therapy programs, small grants for filmmakers in need. They didn't just want to change lives. They wanted to change how people saw kindness itself. But in the middle of their planning, Sandra received a call that froze her. A fire had broken out at one of the art centers supported by the project. Several of the students they'd helped were missing. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Keanu, we have to go." And in that moment, the story of quiet kindness turned into a race against time, one that would test everything they stood for. The night of the fire, the call came just after sunset. The voice on the other end was shaking. "The art center, it's on fire. The kids are trapped inside. We can't reach them." Sandra froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Keanu was standing right beside her, and when he saw her face pale, he didn't ask questions. He just said, "Where?" Within minutes, they were on the road. The car moved through the city like a ghost, sirens echoing faintly in the distance. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, washing the streets with reflections of red and blue lights. Neither of them spoke for most of the drive. The silence carried fear, guilt, and prayer all at once. When they finally reached the street, flames were already licking the windows of the community art center. Firefighters were struggling to contain the blaze, and smoke filled the sky. Sandra jumped out before the car even stopped moving. "The children! Where are the children?" she shouted. A firefighter ran past her. "We got most of them out, ma'am, but a few might still be inside. The fire spread faster than we expected." She looked toward the building, her heart pounding, eyes searching for any sign of life. Keanu grabbed her arm gently. "Stay back. It's not safe." "Keanu, some of them are still in there," she said, her voice trembling. He didn't hesitate. "Then we're going in." Before she could stop him, he ran toward the entrance, pulling his jacket over his mouth to block the smoke. She followed close behind, coughing but refusing to turn back. Inside, the air was thick and dark. The crackling of flames echoed around them like thunder. Broken glass and splintered wood covered the floor. Through the chaos, they heard a faint cry, small, scared, and desperate. "Help! Someone help us!" Keanu turned toward the sound, his eyes squinting through the smoke. "This way," he called to Sandra. They pushed through the hallway, kicking open a door that led to the art studio. Inside, two children huddled beneath a table, clutching each other. Their faces were streaked with soot and tears. Sandra knelt beside them, her voice gentle even as fear burned around her. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're here. You're safe now." Keanu lifted one child into his arms while Sandra helped the other stand. The heat was unbearable now, and the roof above them creaked dangerously. "Go!" Keanu shouted, and they rushed toward the exit. Just as they reached the door, a beam fell behind them, sealing off the hallway. Sandra screamed, but Keanu pushed forward, covering the children with his body as debris fell around them. Outside, firefighters grabbed the children and pulled them to safety. Sandra stumbled out next, coughing hard, her hair and clothes covered in ash. "Keanu!" she shouted, looking back. For a terrifying moment, he didn't appear. Smoke poured from the door and the crowd grew silent. Then, through the haze, a figure emerged. Keanu, limping slightly, his face blackened with soot, still clutching a burnt sketchbook in his hand. Sandra ran to him, tears streaming down her face.
"You could have died."
He smiled weakly. It wasn't just a building. It was their dream. I couldn't let it all burn. He opened the sketchbook, showing her what he had saved, drawings made by the children. One page showed a drawing of her and him, standing beside the words, "Thank you for believing in our light." She covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. "You saved their dreams, Keanu." He shook his head softly. "No, Sandra. We both did." The next day, the fire made global headlines. Photos of Keanu carrying a child through the flames spread everywhere. But what caught the world's attention wasn't the heroism. It was the aftermath. Instead of releasing statements or seeking attention, Keanu and Sandra stayed with the children in the hospital, reading stories, bringing comfort, and helping rebuild the art center from scratch. When journalists tried to interview them, Sandra simply said, "The real story isn't about us. It's about the children who still want to create beauty after watching their world burn." Keanu added softly, "Sometimes tragedy doesn't destroy light, it reveals it." Their words went viral again, sparking a global wave of donations to rebuild the center. Schools, artists, and communities from around the world joined hands. What started as one quiet tribute had now become a movement. But not everyone celebrated. Behind the scenes, investors who had opposed the Light Project saw this attention as a threat. They began spreading false stories online, claiming the fire was staged for publicity, accusing Keanu and Sandra of manipulation. Paul stormed into Keanu's home one evening, furious. "This is out of control, Keanu! They're attacking your name, calling you fake, even questioning your donations." Keanu looked up calmly from where he was writing notes for the new fund. "Let them. I know the truth." Paul slammed the table. "You can't keep being silent forever. Sometimes silence looks like guilt." Sandra, who was sitting nearby, said quietly, "No, Paul. Sometimes silence looks like strength. People will see who he really is." Keanu smiled at her. "Thank you." But deep down, even he knew that the storm wasn't over. The world could lift you up one day and tear you down the next. And yet, he believed, if they stayed true to their kindness, the truth would rise again, just like light through smoke. A week later, the rebuilt art center held its reopening. The children performed a small play, dedicated to the people who believed in us when everything fell apart. When the curtain closed, Sandra noticed Keanu sitting quietly at the back of the room. He was holding a letter, another envelope, just like before. "What's that?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "A promise. To who?" He looked at her, his voice gentle. "To everyone who forgets that kindness can still win." He placed the letter into a small donation box labeled Future Dreams Fund. "You're still writing in silence," she said. "Smiling, always," he whispered, "because sometimes the quietest words echo the longest." What neither of them knew was that this simple act, the dropping of that letter, would spark something far bigger. Something that would travel across continents and change thousands of lives, and it would also uncover a truth about Sandra's past that even Keanu didn't know yet. The hidden letter. The world had started to calm after the fire, but the story of what Keanu and Sandra had done refused to fade. Every newspaper, every interview, every social media post kept circling back to that one photo. Keanu, covered in soot, holding a small child with tears in his eyes, while Sandra stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. People said it didn't look like a celebrity rescue. It looked like love, pure, human love. But for Keanu and Sandra, the story wasn't about fame. It was about rebuilding what had been lost, and yet beneath the quiet success, a mystery began to unfold, one that neither of them expected. A week after the reopening of the art center, Marie, the director, called Sandra early one morning. Her voice was excited but nervous. "Sandra, we found something." "What do you mean?" "In the donation box. When we opened it, there was a letter. It wasn't signed, but it was addressed to you." Sandra froze. "To me?" "Yes, and you should probably read it yourself." Sandra drove straight to the center. The sun was rising, painting the city in shades of gold and quiet promise. When she arrived, Marie handed her a small envelope, worn and simple, sealed with wax. There was no name, only one word written on the front: light. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, filled with handwriting she instantly recognized. It was Keanu's. It read, "Dear Sandra, you once told me that fame is just noise, but kindness is music that never stops playing. You were right. Every time the world feels too dark, I remember your laughter on set, your patience with strangers, your quiet strength when others weren't watching. This project was never just about honoring you. It was about carrying your light further. You may not see it, but your kindness has built more than you'll ever know. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll keep it alive, because the world needs more of what you already are: hope." There was no signature, only the familiar line at the bottom: "Someone believes in your light." Her eyes filled with tears. She pressed the letter to her heart, whispering, "Keanu." She didn't know that at that exact moment, Keanu was across town, visiting an old hospital. Not for a fan visit, not for charity, but for something deeply personal. Inside a quiet ward, an older woman lay resting, her breathing soft. Beside her bed were faded photographs of young artists, community centers, and newspaper clippings of the Light Project. She smiled faintly when Keanu walked in. "You came?" she whispered. He nodded. "I promised I would." This was Eleanor, a retired teacher who had once run free art classes for children in the poorest parts of Los Angeles. Years ago, when Keanu was struggling after losing someone close, she had found him sitting alone outside a school, lost in thought. Instead of asking who he was, she simply gave him a paintbrush and said, "When words can't heal, colors can." That moment changed him. It was Eleanor who had taught him that kindness doesn't need recognition. It only needs continuity. Now, years later, as her health faded, she smiled and said, "You kept the promise. The world is seeing what compassion looks like, and you did it without shouting." Keanu held her hand gently. "You're the reason it started." She shook her head weakly. "No, Keanu. It started the day someone believed in your light. You just never stopped passing it forward." He looked down, his throat tight. "Rest now. I'll make sure your name is remembered." Her eyes closed peacefully. Her hand loosened in his. She was gone. That night, Keanu stood by the ocean, the letter from Sandra still fresh in his mind. He knew she had read it. He could almost feel it. The connection between them, the unspoken understanding that had always existed beyond words. He whispered to the wind, "Thank you, Sandra, for reminding me what it means to care." His phone buzzed. A message from her. "You didn't have to hide the letter." He smiled. "Some things are better found than given, and some things are better shared," she replied. "Come to the center tomorrow. There's something I want to show you." The next day, when Keanu arrived, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. The children had painted a massive mural on the rebuilt wall. It showed two figures, one holding a candle, the other passing it on. Above them, in bright letters, it said, "Light shared is never lost." Sandra stood nearby, smiling softly. "They made it for you," she said. He shook his head. "For us? No," she said gently. "For everyone who believes in something good." Then she turned to him, her voice lower. "There's something else you need to know." She reached into her bag and handed him an old folded note, yellowed with age, fragile. "This was written years ago. I found it hidden inside one of the community center's old art boxes. It's signed with the same words you've been using all along." Keanu unfolded it carefully. It read, "To the next dreamer who finds this, kindness is a circle. When you give, it returns in ways you'll never expect. One day, someone will believe in your light too." Beneath it was a name, Eleanor Harris. Keanu's hands shook. How did she? Sandra smiled softly. "She was one of the first people I ever donated to. Before I even knew you, before any of this started." For a moment, the world went still. They both realized what it meant. The Light Project hadn't started with either of them. It started with the woman who had quietly shaped them both, Eleanor. Her kindness had reached them separately, years apart, without either of them knowing. Keanu whispered, "She connected us, long before we even met." Sandra's eyes glistened. "And we just kept passing it forward." They stood there in silence, the mural shining behind them, the children laughing in the distance. And for the first time, Keanu understood something deeper than fame, than legacy, than even friendship. It was the chain of kindness, unseen, unbroken, infinite. That evening, as the sun set, Keanu and Sandra sat outside the center. No cameras, no speeches, just the sound of laughter fading into twilight. "You know," she said quietly, "people think kindness is small. They don't realize how far it travels." Keanu smiled. "That's because kindness doesn't shout. It whispers, and the right hearts always hear it." She looked at him and whispered, "Thank you for hearing mine." He looked at her with soft eyes. "Thank you for being the reason I still listen." And in that quiet moment, with the ocean breeze carrying the scent of new beginnings, both of them realized they had not only rebuilt an art center, they had rebuilt faith in goodness itself. But fate wasn't finished. One more twist still waited, something unexpected that would turn this story of kindness into a legacy for generations. The legacy of light days passed into weeks, and the world continued to move, but something had changed, quietly, beautifully. The Light Project had spread beyond Los Angeles. Schools in India, hospitals in Canada, and small art centers in Africa began reaching out, asking how they could start their own branches. People didn't ask for fame or permission. They simply wanted to give. The story of Keanu and Sandra's silent kindness had turned into something global, a reminder that one act of compassion could start a chain reaction stronger than any headline. But while the world saw a miracle, for Keanu and Sandra, it was still deeply personal. One morning, Sandra arrived at the community center early. Sunlight poured through the windows, touching the mural the children had painted, the two figures passing the candle of light. She smiled softly, running her fingers over the colors. The paint was still fresh, the message still powerful. Light shared is never lost. As she turned to leave, she noticed something new on the wall. A small brass plaque had been added quietly overnight. It read, "In loving memory of Eleanor Harris, the first spark that lit 1,000 lights, her eyes filled with tears." She knew Keanu had done it. She found him outside later that afternoon, sitting under a tree, surrounded by a few of the kids painting in small sketchbooks. He was teaching them how to draw reflections on water. His voice was soft, steady, patient, exactly like the kind teacher he once met years ago. She smiled. "You never stop giving, do you?" He looked up, grinning faintly. "Neither do you." "I saw the plaque," she said. He nodded. It felt right. She gave us the map. "We just kept walking." She sat beside him, her gaze drifting to the children. "You know, Keanu, all of this, it's bigger than both of us now." He smiled quietly. "That's the best part. It means it'll live on without us." As days passed, donations poured in. Volunteers joined from all around the world. People wrote letters saying how the story inspired them to start over, to forgive, to give, to believe. One note from a single mother read, "I was at my lowest point when I saw your story. Now my daughter and I run a free art class in our garage. Because of you, we believe in light again." Sandra read that note aloud one evening. Her voice trembled slightly. "You see, Keanu? The world doesn't forget kindness, it multiplies it." He smiled, sipping tea. "I think that's what we were meant to do all along. Remind people of what they already have inside them." "And what about us?" she asked softly. "What do we do next?" He looked out at the horizon. We keep believing. Even when no one's watching, she nodded. And maybe keep leaving those notes. He chuckled. Always. It's kind of my thing now. Months later, they were invited to speak at a global humanitarian summit. Big stage, bright lights, cameras everywhere. But before stepping onto the stage, Keanu told Sandra, "Let's do this one differently." She smiled knowingly. Quietly? Quietly, he said. When they walked out, the audience erupted in applause. But instead of speeches, Keanu handed the microphone to a little girl from the art center. Her name was Maya, the same child he had carried out of the fire. The crowd went silent. Maya looked nervous but brave. She said, "They told me to thank them. But I think they just want everyone to know that we can all be kind. You don't need to be famous to be good. You just need to care." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the audience stood, clapping, not for the celebrities, but for the message, a message born from silence, carried by light. After the event, as they stood backstage, Sandra turned to Keanu. "You realize what she just did, right?" He smiled softly. "She passed the light. Just like we hoped. Exactly like we hoped." They watched from the curtain as the children took pictures with volunteers and donors. And in that moment, they both knew. The story no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the world. Years later, the community center had grown into a foundation. Thousands of letters with the same handwritten line, "Someone believes in your light," had reached every corner of the world. No one knew exactly where it started anymore. People had forgotten names, timelines, even the original story. And that was perfect, because the point was never recognition. It was continuation. Keanu visited the center one last time before leaving for a long film project. He walked through the quiet halls, smiling at photos on the walls, faces of children who had grown up, now teachers, doctors, artists. Near the mural, he noticed a new photo frame. It held a picture of him and Sandra sitting with the children, smiling, covered in paint and laughter. Underneath it, a small quote was engraved. "The brightest stars don't burn, they guide." He smiled faintly. "You always knew how to say it better," he whispered, knowing Sandra must have chosen the words. He left a small envelope at the base of the mural like he always did. This one had no letter inside, just one sentence written on the outside, "Pass it forward." A few days later, Sandra found the envelope. She didn't open it. She just placed it in the donation box, exactly where he once left the first one years ago. And for a moment, she looked up at the sky and whispered, "We did it, Keanu. We really did." The wind picked up, carrying the sound of children's laughter from the playground nearby. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the mural glowed softly in the fading light. Somewhere far away, Keanu was walking along a quiet street, smiling as he read a message on his phone. It was from an unknown number, just 4 simple words. "Someone believes in you." He looked up at the night sky, eyes glistening, and whispered, "And I believe in them." The world didn't need to know the whole story. It just needed to feel it, and it did. From a single note of kindness, a symphony of hope was born, played not by fame, but by ordinary hearts choosing to care. And that was how Keanu Reeves quietly honored Sandra Bullock in a way no one expected, by turning her light into a legacy that would never fade.